Welcome back to the Spiderforest Webcomic Podcast. I'm Mathieu Moyen. In this episode, proud to be a working artist. At the Spiderforest Webcomic Collective, every one of us secretly dreams of making their art their full-time profession, but we also have bills to pay. How do you reconcile the myth of the artistic life with the reality of earning a living? Is the uncompromising success that we all dream of really attainable? First, I have a special interview with Jordan Kotzebue, creator of the comic Hominids, where he'll tell me about his life in the artistic trade. Then, Christina Major, creator of the comic Sombulus, will be back for a discussion with Ally Rom Colthoff of the comic Chirault, Dojo of the comic Paisley Brickstone, and Starlia Prichard of the comic Castoff. We're going to be getting down to business here, so stay with us. Hi, I'm Mathieu Moyen, and I make the online graphic novel Six Commando. Like a lot of webcomic artists, I often wonder about making my art a full-time career, and although I have an art-related job, I have to admit it's not exactly the kind of thing I expected to be doing. The graphic novelist Jordan Kotzebue followed a similar path. We first met in 2012 at the New York Comic Con when he was just starting his online graphic novel Hominids. Among many things about him, I was immediately struck by his professionalism, in particular in his attitude towards his work, and we sat down recently to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that interests me about your work is the fact that I know you don't really do it for a living because I know that you have an actual art-related job that you do for your income, but you approach it as though it's a living. The work that you do and just the feeling of the kind of interactions that I know you have and the kind of way that you approach comics seems to me to be, the working artist kind of approach. Is that a thing? Is that something that you do consciously, or is that do you feel that that's like the working artist thing is kind of a myth?
No, I think it's true. I mean, even if I don't make enough for it to be my living, I want to treat it as if it is. I want to treat it with that kind of respect. As if like somebody's going into a comic shop and they're going to actively look for my book off the shelf. I do try and treat it like that with everything that I do, from the writing to the art to kind of how I present the book. And I want it to feel like a professional did it and they're getting their money's worth, even if it's free content. I'm sort of baffled by it, but people will wait a week to read a page. And sometimes there's no dialogue at all. Maybe it's just a 5-second interaction, but they keep coming back. It's still an investment on their part, even if it's free content. For me, I would wait several months so that I have a chunk of content, but people will come back and they get disappointed if they don't have a new page to read. So I sort of treat it like that, and I want to put my best work forward no matter what I do.
I am probably what you'd call an advanced amateur in comics. Like, what I do is, I put it up. I missed a week last week because I have an actual living to earn, and that's not at all comics related. And that was rough. I didn't want to do that, but it was just where I was. I had to work through the weekend, and I just did not have any other time. But at the same time, like, there are people who start out who are like, how do I make this my career? And they're either coming out of art schools or they're coming out of art-related disciplines and sort of saying, I want to quit my job and make comics my living. How much of that is approach? How much of it is like tactics or strategy or that? Like, to what extent do you think you can actually think through a thing like that?
That's a good question, and I think it's so different for everybody I've ever met who's gotten into comics. I live in Seattle, and there's actually a fair amount of comic people out here, and everybody's story is super different. Like, one guy I know, he didn't start doing comics until he was in his 40s. He came through it through like doing porn comics, and then slowly made his way into more mainstream comics. And then I've met people who did webcomics the way we're doing it, and they've gotten professional work. I've met people who do fan art, and their fan art's so good that like one buddy of mine is working for Marvel and DC right now, just based on the fact that he did really awesome fan art. And he was able to leave the games industry. So the irony there is that a lot of people in the gaming industry, a lot of artists, we make way more money in games than we ever would in comics. Yet we all want to do comics, like everybody on my team wants to do comics, but we're okay with doing games because it's almost an easier industry to get into, and you make more money and you get health insurance and things like that. But we want to be drawing all these characters that we grew up with, So for anybody who's like just getting out of art school and doing comics is their passion, I do think something like webcomics is a great way to do it for several reasons. Like, the first reason is you learn what you're made of, really, because comics is hard, you know? Like, that's sort of why I started my webcomic, is I wanted to see if I could even do a single issue, if I could do a 22-page issue. And once I was able to do that and didn't get burnt out or wasn't overwhelmed, I was just like, cool, let's just keep going. And that was sort of a test. And I think that's one reason, Marvel and DC, they have people do like a 6-page test run, because it's not just about how good the work is. It's also about how quickly you can get it done and can you meet deadlines and things like that. So that's the first stage in webcomics that I think is beneficial. The other aspect is you just get better at it as you go. Your first 10 pages aren't going to be very good. And, once you're 80 to 200 pages in, your work is going to be amazing. Like, I've looked at a lot of webcomics and I'm just like, this is beautiful. They're 300 pages in. I wonder what page one looks like. And it looks like they were out of high school. In some cases they were, but they kept doing it so diligently, they got really good really fast. And it's not surprising when you see them getting their comic published through Image or something. So yeah, I think there's lots of approaches to it, and I think anybody who wants to start a comic should just do it.
Like you were saying a minute ago, like if you look at the earliest pages of Six Commando, they're dreadful. Like I hate looking at them because like I can do so much better now. But the fact is that I still did it. Like that's still done. And I'm much more comfortable with what I'm doing now as opposed to what I was doing then. But you have to go through what you were doing in order to get to what you want to be doing.
Exactly. I often think those early pages are my favorite, even though they're the worst, writing and drawing wise, because that learning curve was so big. I value them most, even though I'd prefer not to look or read them at all, you know?
See, that's another part of getting into sort of the working artist, whether it's the myth or the reality or, the way that people build it up for themselves. And I don't mean they, I mean we, everybody does it, is you think of your idealized, like I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to have a studio and it'll look like this and I'll go in there every day and great art will happen and it'll be this sort of mystical experience. But, that only exists in your mind. It's still work, it's still a job, and you still have to go through a set of tasks in order to complete a piece of work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
So how do you get over that? That's another big area of discussion as well, is like making the transition from the myth of what you want to be doing into the reality of what you want to be doing. Are they the same? Like, is that something that do you have to get over it, or do you have to integrate it into some sort of a greater idea of what that kind of life is going to be for you?
Sure. I think it might be a little bit of both. I mean, part of it is the fact that I like it. I want to do it. So there's the enjoyment factor in there. But you're right, it is work. Sometimes I have to stay up late and finish a page and work really hard. Part of the enjoyment is I like working. I actually like my job quite a bit too. Sometimes I'll be doing sort of monotonous tasks at the office, and I'll kind of zen out and I'm listening to a podcast that I really enjoy, but I'm just doing these really basic tasks that have nothing to do with art, but I'm kind of enjoying the fact that I'm just doing the task. So it's a matter of finding my enjoyment in something, even if it is difficult, and kind of finding something a little greater out of it. And then the other aspect is kind of finding those personal deadlines. I think deadlines are really important. That's the biggest reason I decided to make my comic a web comic rather than trying to, do an issue and then find a publisher to take it on, because I feel like I never would have gotten that first issue done. So the fact that I have something to be beholden to, like every Tuesday I put out a page, I know I'm putting out the page no matter what. So you got to find it in you somewhere. Like if I don't want to do it that week, it's kind of too bad, like I'm going to do it, whether I lose sleep or lose time with my family or anything like that. Like I'm going to go in and just get the job done.
Prioritizing is a big thing too. Like if you're going to commit to a thing that you want to do that has that kind of personal value to it, prioritizing is definitely important. Like you have to make it a priority. But at the same time also, you have to not get yourself into a position where you come to resent what you're doing as well, because that's how people burn out in any kind of a job at the same time. I've seen it happen in comics and I've seen it happen in any job that people do where they over prioritize and don't look out for themselves at the same time.
I put out a questionnaire because there have been times where I've been burnt out, and I was just, and sometimes the burning out comes from your fan engagement and whether or not anybody's paying attention, right? Sometimes it feels like there isn't anybody out there, and you have no idea whether people are putting a value on your comic or in the way that you feel it is valuable. And so I put out a questionnaire. I was just like, hey, just curious. I want to get people's feelings on the book. Like, are you liking it? Are you liking the direction? Do you like the pace? Should I just kind of wrap things up or what? Talk to me. And I was wondering if anybody would reply at all, because those deadlines are important to me. And do they need to be, was something I needed to ask myself. Like, does it really matter if I get a page out every Tuesday? Or maybe it's not so much. Maybe I can reprioritize and think about other things. And fortunately, I did get a lot of engagement back. And I think asking people questions, they'll tend to reply. And the overwhelming response was, we love the comic. We hope you keep going, but also don't kill yourself over it. Like, we respect the work and we'll wait. We'd rather you enjoyed the comic so we can enjoy the comic, So it was nice that fans were actually kind of cool about it. And it kind of reinforced your point.
Do you think that if you'd followed a more traditional path that was sort of you do the thing, then you do the other thing, and then you get a job with the comics company, and then they issue you drawings to do, and then they assign you a comic, would you enjoy it as much if you had gone down that path? Or do you think that there's something to that? Do you think that that path adds some sort of a structure to it that is missing in webcomics? Do you think that webcomics is sort of short-circuiting something that's of value?
I don't know whether I would have enjoyed it as much or whether I would have gotten burnout or maybe hated the industry or something like that. There's a lot of artists that I know who, when they talk about the comic industry, sometimes I'm just like, I'm pretty happy where I am. Kind of glad that that's not the avenue I went. At the same time, it might have had a lot of value, working on some more mainstream titles first. Like I said, everybody's path in comics is different. And I think that that's the main thing. Like, I don't want to say there's one way or another. I just think webcomics is another route you could do.
Yeah, there really is no right way to do it. The right way to do it is whatever way you do it.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing I have noticed is that the benefit I find in webcomics is that since you can do whatever you want, I think there's some refreshing storytelling that you're not finding anywhere else. For example, one of the reasons I did like doing the webcomic and just kind of self-publishing and not going through a publisher is that I can dive into subject matter and imagery that I want to do without asking a publisher's permission, right? My comic is about a bunch of naked jungle people running around, and I feel like every time I talk to a publisher, it does somewhat shoot me in the foot that I have a bunch of topless people in the jungle because it's considered nudity. I'm sort of at the point with it where it's just like, I don't even really consider it that way. It's just the way they dress. So it doesn't come off as nudity to me. But that's because I've been with it for so long and I can just do whatever I want. I don't have to apologize for anything. And when I do show this stuff to publishers, it's like instantly you're trying to make excuses for it. And I think that's an upside to webcomics. You don't have to make excuses for anything.
Hi, welcome to the Spiderforest Webcomic podcast. I am joined here with a couple of people from the Spiderforest to try to talk about the interview that we just listened to and get more input on the whole working as a webcomic artist or trying to get money out of this sort of gig. So I am here with Dojo from Paisley Brickstone, Starlia Prichard from Castoff, and Ally Rom Colthoff from Chirault. So, hi guys, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Terrible. No, just kidding. It's fine.
Oh, we're good? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, we all make webcomics. We all started this endeavor. Are any of us doing this full time? Is your webcomic your full-time job right now? Do you see yourself trying to make it your full-time job? Or where are we all right now in terms of the work and webcomic split?
It sort of is my full-time job, but that's partly because I've been out of work since September and finding a new job has been difficult. So what I've been doing while I take care of like the resumes and the fact that I'm moving soon and all that, basically all my time is spent on comics. I'm trying to make it work, especially since where I'm going to be moving, it won't cost much to live at all. I'm hoping that between now and when I get to Kansas, that I'll pick up at least a portion of the income that I need in order to survive. And sorry for the cat shrieking in the background, if you can even hear that.
Kitty.
My cat's going crazy.
I'm actually in kind of a similar position to Dojo right now because I was working full-time in the animation industry, and the production that I was on wrapped up in mid-March of this year. And instead of going and immediately looking for another gig, I decided to try to focus solely on comics and just see kind of how far that could take it. Like, you know, if I'm working full-time on my comic, could I improve my Patreon? Could I focus on making more merchandise for sale and stuff? And I launched a Kickstarter a couple weeks ago that will be long finished by the time this episode airs. But it's kind of just like a project to see what I can make out of my comic if I am doing nothing but that for, a few months. And then depending on how it goes, maybe I'll start applying again for another studio gig or just keep going. We'll see.
And what about you, Star?
By the time this episode goes up, this will no longer be true because I am leaving this job in a couple weeks. But right now, I have a full-time job as an artist. It's a 9 to 5 in an office. I make art for standardized testing, which is basically you take your little end-of-the-year standardized American test, and if there's a picture of a gerbil in the test booklet, I drew the gerbil. That's my entire job.
That's exciting.
I draw gerbils all day.
Aww.
It's mostly graphs and sometimes trees, but occasionally I get to do animations, and those are fun and take me 4 days. But yeah, I'm getting ready to move. Again, by the time this episode goes up, I will not be working there anymore, but I'm moving to a different full-time job on the other side of the planet, and I'm nervous about it, but I'm okay.
But it all sounds like we're either studying art or kind of doing art on the side. For me, I'm full-time freelance graphic design, so I do very corporate work. It's very boring. Gerbils would be the highlight of my day if I got to draw gerbils. But I don't. I get to do pie charts and corporate PowerPoint presentations, which has its similarities, but it's not super creative. But because it's full-time freelance, I do have a lot more leeway than I would if I had a day job to work on Sombulus and put a little more time into it. Like Ally noted, there's an interesting thing that happens when you're not working full-time, in that you can say, okay, well, this is what I want my comic to be. This is where I want to bring my comic, either through Patreon or Kickstarter or any kind of crowdfunding. What can I do financially if I have more time? So that's always an interesting question. And I don't think, at least for me, I had no idea how much time making webcomics was going to take. When I was first starting out, I had a lot of professional goals to monetize them right away, to really get into eBay or sell my originals or something like that. And I'm just wondering about you guys. Did you have plans originally when you first started making webcomics? Were there books that you read that you were trying to emulate the business strategy of, or how did you start out? What was your mindset there?
I had zero plan of turning my comic into a book when I started it. It was purely just going to be something I could say in my portfolio that I did. That has changed since then, and unfortunately, because it's changed, my early pages are no good for publishing a book, and since I am planning on doing my first Kickstarter in October, that's kind of a problem. I have to redraw the first 30 or so pages because they're at 75 dpi and the width and height doesn't match anything, or the dimensions don't match the later pages, which are standard comic size. And so I had no professional goals outside of portfolio at first. So I didn't even consider monetizing anything until I think February, and that's when I started thinking this might end up being my long-term thing, whether I like it or not, because job searching has just been awful here. So that's kind of been my goal
Yeah, I can definitely see when you're between jobs and you're searching for jobs, it does become more appealing to say, okay, well, this might have to be a piece of the pie for a while.
Yeah. And I mean, I would like it to be, because I mean, I went to school for sequential art, and that's what my degree is, and it would be great if I could put that to actual use. And I'm a pretty easy to please person. I don't feel like I need a lot of money to be happy, but I do need money to pay bills and stuff, and
Yeah.
yeah. So as long as I make enough to pay the bills, I think I would be okay with whatever amount that I'm earning, and luckily it really doesn't need to be that much, so we'll see.
What about you, Star? You had a comic before Castoff, but you also have Castoff. So for either of them, what were your professional goals starting out?
My first comic ran for about 3 years, and I literally started that one with the goal of, I just graduated high school, it's summer, I'm bored. That was the entire motivation behind that one. I ran that one for a couple of years before it went into perma-hiatus because it was really bad. But while I did that, one of my things was I did actually run a Kickstarter for that one. The goal was like $300 just to like get a couple books printed, mostly just like for family members and anyone who maybe wanted to read them. And I ended up making like $700, and I was like, whoa, what?
Cha-ching!
It was like, hello, money dollars. Where did you come from?
Good old cash train.
And so, yes, little me, sophomore in college, was just like super excited. It's like, oh my God, I make a thing on the internet and I got like $25 from it after everything was paid for. Yes!
Living the dream.
Yes, $25 and a box of books that I can see from where I'm sitting.
Oh.
That's still left over from that Kickstarter, because I haven't like done any tables or anything since then.
Did that change how you approached Castoff then, or?
Kinda. So after I hiatus the first comic, that was like right after I graduated college. And that was like an awful time of my life. It's like, I just graduated college, you're trying to find a job and everything sucks. And I'm just like, I didn't do art for like almost a year. And so my primary goal with Castoff was, I've had this story in my brain for like 6 years now. I could totally polish this up and actually make this into a webcomic, and then maybe my life will suck less because I'll actually have something to do. So I didn't go into it thinking, yes, make me money, make me millions of dollars, twirled my tiny mustache. But what ended up happening was Castoff actually did significantly better. Within like 2 months, I think I had twice the readership that my first comic ever had. Between my first comic and Castoff is when Patreon got popular. When I first started, I don't even think it was a thing. Or if it was a significantly smaller thing. And so then I ended up starting a Patreon a little less than a year into Castoff because I had a job scare where I was like, oh God, I'm going to be fired at the end of this month. I wasn't going to do this till later, but hey, if anyone has like quarters they want to throw at me over the internet, that would be super cool. And so at this point it's actually kind of grown and I'm making like a decent chunk of money on it now. I think I've like passed $80 at this point per month. I know that there's a handful of people in the universe who make like enough money to live full time just on Patreon. And I'm thinking that would be cool, but it's probably either it's never going to happen or it's going to take like 10 years. My thing right now is I'm just kind of surfing. It's like, yeah, I'll ride this wave, see where it takes me.
Patreon is a game changer, but you're right that a lot of these people who are making the living on it have been doing comics for literally 10 years or more.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny because I have been doing a comic for 10 years, and when I started, Patreon didn't exist, Kickstarter didn't exist. These things like started after I was already like a good 5 or 6 years into it. If those things had existed when I launched my webcomic, I might have taken a totally different approach to it or been more ambitious about my goals. I was just starting it totally for fun. Like, I want to do a story. I'll put it online for maybe my family members or my school friends to look at, and didn't even realize that there were more people paying attention until I was already like 3 years in. it's been fun kind of changing the context of the comic as a product the further I go along, like the more stuff I see to do with it.
As things are introduced, you kind of change. You have to kind of keep an eye on what people are using and what people are finding success with, and what matches, I guess, with your own personal style, because there's a lot of stuff that can change. So I guess my next question is, what are your professional goals at this stage? What do you see right now that you want to be doing with your comic, and where do you want to go? What's the next level?
I'm actually in the process of finishing the final arc of my comic, and I'm doing the Kickstarter right now for Volume 3. It's going to be 5 volumes in total once it's actually finished. So my next plan is that once this book is done, I'm going to be starting another Kickstarter, probably next year around this time, or maybe in like January or February. And that'll be for the final 2 books, kind of all in one, and then maybe like a nice little box set, and then I can kind of be finished Chirault and have it as a complete storyline, and I can start working on the next comic.
From a professional standpoint, a lot of my goals actually don't revolve a whole lot around Paisley Brickstone. Reason being is when I started Paisley Brickstone, it was never supposed to make too much sense, and since it was never my goal to make money off of it in the first place, I'm kind of sort of steering away from that, and I'm trying to get one of my other comics to be kind of my moneymaker. Well, Paisley Brickstone kind of stays I do whatever I want with this thing. Because I feel like if I wanted to monetize it, I'd have to explain a lot more than I am in the story, and that I ever plan on explaining, because I've already got tons of questions about, well, what's this mean? What's that mean? And what are you going to do with this? And it's like, obviously, even if I knew, I wouldn't tell them, but a lot of that stuff, it's like, I don't plan on explaining it, even if I do have an answer, like, ever. And I know that'll disappoint some people, but it's just, it's just how the comic is. And so what I'm trying to do right now is I'm actually collaborating with a writer on another comic, which I'm being paid to do that. So that's some of my monetary professional stuff, and that'll be launched sometime in July. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to be posted. I think he's thinking of putting it on Tapastic right now, but I'm going to try and look and see what else is out there, because maybe I shouldn't say how I feel about them right now, but I have very complicated feelings
About Tapastic. Yeah, that's another one. I mean, they had a monetization thing. I mean, if we're talking about, people making money off of webcomics, they did have something, didn't they?
They had a Patreon equivalent, I think.
They got rid of that ages ago.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the problem with Tapastic right now is they're very focused on their mobile app and making the mobile app successful, but they're kind of neglecting the desktop half, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because some of the things they have on their mobile app you would think they would also want on their desktop, like the fact that you need to buy keys and stuff to unlock chapters of their premium content, but for some reason you can't do that on the desktop version, which baffles me. That just makes no sense to me why they wouldn't have it in both places. And then another thing they launched recently, at the beginning of the year the end of last year, was the tipping program.
Yeah.
That was fantastic at first, but it's slowly becoming not worth doing, because, again, they're making it not as worth it, because they're like, oh, well, we need to make sure that we're still getting money. It's weird. I don't understand.
Tapastic's been making a lot of weird business decisions recently.
Oh yeah, they recently insulted all of their creators, and that was one of the biggest things. So it's just I don't even know anymore, guys.
Yeah, I don't know. The only reason I'm still on Tapastic after all this nonsense is I actually do make a decent chunk of money there.
Uh-huh.
From ads and tipping combined. I call it my burrito fund. It's just enough money to buy me a couple burritos a month.
That's my Project Wonderful fund right there. That's my burrito fund. It's
yes.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
the big comic that I'm hoping to like monetize and stuff, I released on Tapastic like a week before they made all those really dumb changes, and I kind of ended up regretting it almost immediately. That comic, I'm trying to see if I can't get like a publisher or something. The reason I made it in the first place, it was never supposed to be something I offered to people purely for free, but I let a friend talk me into posting it. And so I'm still kind of looking around and hoping I can find something.
It should be worth mentioning that I worked on my comic for almost its entire runtime while having a day job on the side. I wasn't working on it full time ever until this last month. It's always been like an on the side thing beside a separate means of income, because my Patreon's been doing pretty reasonably well, but not like pay my entire rent and grocery bill kind of well. You get that difference between, yes, I'm making money on my comic and I'm making a living wage on my comic. Those are very different things, and not a lot of people can make it to the second one. I mean, you've got to get some kind of balance if you're doing a day job and working a comic at the same time. But I think it's possible to get that balance, and some people have done their entire comic on the side of a day job.
I follow a lot of like webcomic artists on Twitter, and I feel like there's almost a stigma going around. It's like, no, your comic should be your focus. It's like, if you have a webcomic and you're still doing a part-time job, it's like, then you're not successful. And it's like, define success at that point.
Yeah.
Is success to you just making enough money to live? Because at that point, you're just in it for the money. And is this a passion project or not?
Yeah.
Because like, from the point of view of someone points to self who started webcomics just because she likes drawing comics, it's weird to me that a lot of people are trying to get into webcomics specifically to make money.
Yeah, and they also kind of don't understand. See, this is something I don't think a lot of people get quite yet, is you cannot make a living off of just the webcomic. You can't just draw pages and expect to make money off of that, which is why Patreon is so good. And I don't understand why people keep acting like it's a tip jar, because it's not. This is a subscription. Subscriptions aren't donations. You have to have something like that, like Patreon, or be doing Kickstarters often enough that actually earn enough money, or, you know, do freelance or something. You can't just make pages and expect that to work unless you happen to get picked up by someone like Webtoons or Hiveworks or somebody who's willing to give you money to do it.
To Ally's point, sands will shift as you go. As you're making your webcomic and you're 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years into it, things are going to change. Patreon's here today. Maybe it's not going to be here tomorrow. Ads were there when you started, and maybe you could have made some money off of those, but ad revenue kind of took a downfall too. You know, you can start, you know, with the best practices now. I would agree that Kickstarter's a really good thing right now. Patreon is a really good thing right now. But you always have to stay adaptable. So finding yourself something steadier will contribute to your overall happiness in the end, I feel like. Or just being okay with being adaptable and saying, you know, if this doesn't work out, then I have other things I could be doing.
Yeah. And another thing is that I really just want to just sit a lot of people, especially people on like to pass it down and just explain to them is your number of subscribers and stuff like that does not matter if you're wanting to be a professional. You're never going to have the number that you would need to like make a living again just on pages, unless you're like get lucky and get mega popular. So it's like paying attention to those sub numbers is just not worth the headache.
There's artists who might have very low numbers of subscribers on the internet, but maybe they do extremely well at conventions, or maybe they sell like original work or paintings in galleries or something. They might have different income streams that you might know nothing about. They might not publicize it.
Exactly.
But there's all kinds of different ways that people can monetize the work that they do. And it might not even be related to their comic. They might be making other art and supplementing their income or making their entire income off that.
Yeah, exactly.
Drawing gerbils for standardized tests.
Yep.
Painting 3D characters for animated productions.
Yeah, I mean, I do this boring corporate work, but I mean, it is art, it is design, and there is a certain itch that it scratches in terms of visual problem solving that is similar to comics. So, I mean, just because I love my comic doesn't necessarily mean I have to make all of my money off of it. I think I'm probably more in Dojo's camp here. I started Sombulus as a very experimental thing. I wanted to be able to do whatever I wanted to do, and I don't necessarily care about market appeal so much. Of course, I like selling things, and I like going to conventions with it, and I like doing Kickstarters and things. But in terms of, is it going to be a full-time gig for me? I don't necessarily know. Not with Sombulus, probably, and I'm okay with that. So I think what I would advise people who are looking at their passion for their stories and saying, I want to do webcomics for a living, is exactly that. Just look around, see what else you can do with your art that will supplement it, because webcomics are going to be a piece of the pie, maybe. They're never likely going to be the entire pie.
Yeah, my own advice would be just don't even worry about whether you're going to make webcomics your living or not until you've at least been drawing comics for at least half a year to a year, because I feel like that's a big pitfall that a lot of people fall into, is as soon as they get into webcomics and as soon as they start meeting other creators, they start feeling this pressure that they need to take it to that level as well just because everyone else is. And it's like, you really don't. Like, if you're just getting started, focus on figuring out what you want to do, whether it's really something that you enjoy doing, and make it something that you can love first before even worrying about whether it's going to be a professional for a living type thing, because otherwise you're probably going to hate doing it and then you won't finish it, and then yeah, it's just not worth getting caught up in the professional stuff unless you're sure that that's what you want to do and that you've been doing it long enough to make that decision. But most people have not been doing it long enough to make that decision, that I see going around like asking these big questions.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true that you have to be passionate about the work that you're doing, because that will always be reflected in your story. If you're not into it, then your audience won't be into it, because there'll always be that sense of detachment. And there was a conversation that went around online a little while ago about a lot of the best practices advice that webcomic artists will give one another. And there's one thing that sounds like common sense that a lot of people will say: start with something short as your first comic, because then you can just finish it and not be like stuck to it forever. But for some people that might not be the best route to take, because if a big, long, epic story is the only thing that you find you can be passionate about and really sit down with and really get into, then just go for that. Like, just do it. Do the thing that is the most in your heart at that time, and don't try to force your work into a length that you're not feeling or a theme or a genre that you're not into. Indie stuff, its biggest advantage is that you're not beholden to an editor or to a marketing team or to any kind of like, this is what you have to do to make the money. People have found that they can make the money doing just whatever they happen to feel like, because it turns out other people are into it, and you won't know who else is going to be into the crazy stuff that you're into until you've made it and put it out there.
Let's kind of wrap it up. Like, webcomics are great and we love them and we all love making them, but there is a certain amount of experimentation that goes on that prevents them, I think, in all of our cases, from being a full day job. Have we all made our peace with that fact? Dojo has said that there might be another comic that you're putting more emphasis into being more marketable or
moneymaker.
Yeah. So that's a route too. You don't necessarily have to force your one perfect idea into that field if it's going to be experimental versus monetary.
You see a lot of people online, like just a cursory Google search can tell you this many people are making their full-time jobs out of their webcomic. Their webcomic is their job. And they're probably doing, like we said, some kind of combination of Patreon, Kickstarter, internet tip jars, doing commissions, etc. But the thing is, I feel like a lot of people will see these successful artists online and then try to emulate exactly what they do. And then when the results are different, they get upset.
Yes.
Because what I feel like is a hard pill to swallow, but that people ultimately need to come to terms with, is that what works for one person will not necessarily be exactly what works for you. And with all the variety of stuff there is on the internet, for making money or otherwise, like spreading your comic, what works for you might not work for other people.
I saw a point that was kind of towards this, which is that when you are looking at somebody else's track record for publication or work online, you're really looking at their highlights reel, like all of their successes, and they can bury their failures as much as they want. It'll be less visible than the things they make that have like really gotten off the ground. But when you do that, you're not seeing the years and years of like working in obscurity. And there's definitely some people who do find that overnight success, maybe like right out of high school or university or whatever. It's just like immediately their first project gets like picked up and everybody's like, oh my God, I would love to do that. Oh no, but now I'm 25. It's too late. Like I can't be that ingenue straight out of school rocketing right up to like New York bestseller list or something. But that's such an unusual case and you really can't hold yourself up to that because there's room for one of those at a time, maybe. And don't stress about it. Like there's a lot of ways of finding success and doing what you want to do. And so long as you're making the creation that you're into, that's what really counts, is that you're making your thing, like your product, the way you want to do it.
Yeah, one of the things that they repeated constantly all throughout my schooling, and I've just noticed a trend of the people that I admire. You are probably not going to find success until you're 30 and over. That tends to be the range. I mean, if you're over 30 and you still haven't found it, that's still okay. But if you're below that, because I know a lot of people in like their 20s or, you know, just out of high school that are really worried about, oh no, I'm gonna be so old soon. And it's like, for one, no, you're not. 30 is not old. For two, that is when most people get successful, is in their 30s. So it's fine. And I have to tell myself that a lot because I'm getting close to being 30 and I'm not always that happy about it. But hey, if I find my success then, it's fine.
I just turned 35 2 weeks ago. I don't know.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. So we do live past 30. I just wanted to let everybody know that it's possible.
Yes.
The pencil does not dramatically fall out of your hand at 30 and then you can never pick it back up again. Art doesn't have a time limit.
No.
You can keep doing stuff as long as you have the passion for it. Just keep doing stuff.
Yeah. What was interesting to me was when I started Sombulus, I was in my 20s. All of my characters were on the younger side, 18, 19. Yeah, my really old person was 24.
Oh, man.
And I was just
Ancient.
like, oh my gosh, this is so old. Why would this person be doing this? Obviously, they're not going to go on any adventures when they're 24 years old.
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
I started getting older. I'm like, 24-year-olds can go on adventures. 34-year-olds can go on it. 40, it doesn't freaking matter. And I feel like the same thing applies to art. You know, you can start this journey if you are 70 years old and you're listening to this podcast and you've had a webcomic in your heart and you want to make it. Please do.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. This program is a production of the Spiderforest Webcomic Collective. Our executive producer is Christina Major, and Eva is our showrunner and our audio engineer. The Spiderforest Webcomic Collective is a creator-owned organization funded by voluntary contributions from our members and from readers and listeners like you. Thanks for your support. And don't forget to go to spiderforest.com to read the over 70 webcomics written and drawn by our members. They're all available for free. And at spiderforest.com you can also join the discussion on our forums, interact with our creators, and more. And as always, you can even click on support to make a donation. Your financial support helps make our work possible, including this podcast. So thanks very much for your assistance. I'd like to thank Jordan Kotzebue for joining us for this episode. You can read his comic Hominids at hominidscomic.com. I'd also like to thank Christina Major for bringing us this episode's discussion, as well as our members who participated, Ally Rom Colthoff, Dojo, and Starlia Prichard. Christina produces the comic Sombulus. You can read it at sombulus.com. Ally produces the comic Chirault. You can read it at chirault.sevensmith.net. Dojo produces the comic Paisley Brickstone. You can read it at pbjhigh.com. Star produces the comic Castoff. You can read it at castoff-comic.com. Eva produces the comic Bits Fair. You can read it at bitsfair.com. And I produce the comic Six Commando. You can read it at viciousprint.com/sixcommando. I'm Mathieu Moyen. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.